Um, the other aspect that I would like to also emphasize is the involvement of most specifically local actors in the form of civil society organizations or even member state agencies that are going to work hand in hand with the African Union or the regional economic committees or different agencies on the ground. The majority of the stories we hear on the ground is a kind of competition to available resources. We should really come out of that particular tendency. Otherwise, we are not going to help each other. Therefore, how can we synergize better in order to come up with a collective understanding of the situation on the ground so that we can utilize the available resources wisely and make a difference accordingly. Then, of course, I came from the African Union. I don't want to give any kind of introduction about the African Union, you all know. But the most specific thing I would like to emphasize here is one of the pillars of the African Peace and Security Architecture, which is the Continental Early Warning System, should really take into consideration aspects of climate-induced security risks, okay, because they are coming more and more common. And in the very original conception of the Continental Early Warning System, we didn't see that coming. Therefore, the kind of indicators, if I say it that way, were not developed appropriately in order to capture certain issues of concern on the ground from our different data sources. But over time, we have been having some learning phases in order to modify those indicators in such a way that we can capture these specific related aspects of climate, peace, and security. And again, we are hoping prevention is much better, especially if our institutions are going to involve and invest more on structural conflict prevention issues. Therefore, the Continental Early Warning System has been developing a number of tools and processes that are actually focusing on mitigating these structural issues. But I think I can say it this way, even if we are not supposed to touch that political angle, but our institutions are lacking the appetite to invest more on structural conflict prevention issues. They are really shying away into the more rewarding potential interventions. Mainly they are like crisis management, conflict management, mediation related issues, or a kind of firefighting issues. Okay, therefore, whatever early warning system we are having, in the end, should try to build upon building resiliencies in our own different communities. Without doing that, okay, we can actually be simply victims of climate change. Okay, therefore, the issue is not about really addressing disaster risk reduction or humanitarian interventions, but if we really look into the other angle in order to face the opportunity that we are having in building resiliencies in our different communities. Therefore, if we invest more on structural conflict prevention first, that are going to build local capacities, we are going to reap the dividend really well. Okay, but most of our institutions are actually shying away from that kind of an approach. Therefore, regarding that particular synergy, a typical example I can share is, of course, that particular aspect is provided to us in our protocol, the African Peace and Security Architecture, to work hand in hand with local actors, most importantly, civil society actors. As early warning systems, we need raw data, as Sandy mentioned earlier, and that particular raw data is going to come from our local sources. But as you're aware, we are covering 55 countries, and that is too wide to be covered. But at least we have got...
Bringing that point about the importance of our institutions investing in a more longer-term structural response, and I think that's an important one maybe that we can take today. I'd like to bring in Dr. Kwesi here. From your perspective with the World Food Programme, I mean, how do you see these obstacles and synergies? And specifically, I know that you're thinking about these food systems programming cycles and how some of this information can be used to influence those.
Thanks so much. Let me start by saying first, thanks to the Kenyan government for inviting us here. Thank you for the German Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and also thanks so much for Adelphi for putting this together. Let me start with two confessions because I think it frees the soul. So the first confession is that my brother at the back in his question said, if you see his hands in his pocket, it's because he's cold and he's from West Africa. I am from even farther west than him, from the West Indies. So if you see me shaking, it is because I am freezing. They told me, come to Africa, enjoy the climate. This is not what I expected. I'm not built for this. That's confession number one. Confession number two is when I got the invite for this panel from Janani, I was of two minds. Do I come and sit and speak as a WFP expert on climate and climate security? Or do I come as an angry third worlder, upset that we're having these conversations again and that the financing is not there, the structures are not there, the mechanisms are there? There's always money for conferences. It seems that we just don't have the money for either loss and damages, we don't have the money for insurance, we don't have the money for anticipatory action, and we don't have the money for actually preventing the losses, nor do we have the willpower to move away from the addiction to fossil fuels that is fueling this climate change crisis. So I decided to do both. So I've come here as an angry third worlder from the World Food Program. I've got my World Food Program suit and my angry third worlder tie. So I've done both. What I'll try to do in the next 5 minutes or so is tie together some of what we've heard from Dr. Sunday and some of what we've heard from Taye to explain a little bit as to how agencies like the World Food Program, who are specifically focused on food, how we try to use this early warning information. So, first of all, why are we back here again? And why are we doing this in Nairobi as opposed to Accra or Dakar or South Africa? There is something peculiar about the Horn. It's a region that is going through multiple transitions, that is going through a demographic transition. It's going through a transition from rural to urban. It is going through an economic transition. It's going through political transitions. And on top of that, it's dealing with a change in the climate. Many other regions and countries are dealing with these crises, but here in the Horn of Africa, you could also say in the Caribbean, I have to plug my home region, you're dealing with all of these transitions at the same time. And as Nazanin said this morning, what the climate crisis is, it's a risk multiplier. It weakens people's resilience. It makes them more vulnerable to shocks, not only climate-related shocks, but other shocks. What we're trying to do as the UN, and in particular as World Food Program, is building that societal fat that allows people to go through these shocks without collapsing. How do we do that? In the past, we did this in a very unstructured way, which was moving food, largely food from the West, from point A to point B, throwing it off the back of the truck. If it hit you in the head, we were sorry, but our hope was that this was the strategy. The climate crisis and the interaction between climate and conflict has forced us to be a little more strategic and has forced us to be smarter in the way we do our work. How have we done that? We've done that in three main ways. We've done it with better analysis. We've tried to understand better this bidirectional relationship between climate and conflict. And through our partnership with Adelphi, we've done a number of research projects where we've looked at the way climate impacts conflict and vice versa. My colleague Susanna Huber here has led on that research with Adelphi, and it's come up with some incredibly interesting findings for us. One is that it's not a direct causal link between climate and conflict. It's not from point A to point B. It's an incredibly complex web, and it affects different countries differently. One could build on what Alice said this morning about climate change affecting all of us. Climate change does affect all of us, but it affects us all quite differently. We've noticed from our research partnership with Adelphi that there are a number of societal groups that are more vulnerable. These include women, these include pastoral communities, and these include the urban poor. These are the groups that fall between the cracks. So as WFP, we've been trying to use the early warning research that we get from IGAD, from the African Union, to see how we can try to buttress some of the challenges of climate change through one, better analysis, through two, a broader range of partners that we work with. So initially it was quite simple. It was truckers, it was truck drivers. Now we try to deal with women entrepreneurs. We try to bring in pastoral, sustainable, integrated food systems. So what does this look like? This is a lot of high-level conversation. What does this look like? Let me give you one concrete example from our work in South Sudan. In South Sudan, we see, I guess it's not the image that we have in our heads of climate change. We think of climate change, we think of Somalia, we think of northeastern Kenya, we think of people's camels dying. In South Sudan, they're dealing with the exact opposite crisis. Around 40% of South Sudan is now more or less permanently underwater. These are areas where pastoral communities used to roam that are now under, in some cases, 3, in some cases, 4 meters of water. You've got entire towns now that are islands, and you have urban planners trying to deal with that crisis. How do you get goods in and out of a town that is now no longer connected to anything? In one particular part of South Sudan, in Jonglei State, in an area around Bor, we've had these flood waters that just haven't receded from the rivers. It's forcing local cattle herders there to move to drier areas. But lo and behold, those dry areas are inhabited by another community who are farmers who don't take well to pastoralists coming eating their crops. This is leading to a cycle of violence and revenge violence that is pushing those communities and those areas to the brink. What is the role then for a food security agency like WFP in a situation like this? We worked with partners within regional organizations, within South Sudan, within research institutes to understand this challenge more clearly. And what we understood was that there were structural ways to hold back some of these flood waters. And in those flooded areas, WFP has helped communities, because it's not WFP doing it, it's the communities themselves. We've helped communities reclaim 1,643 square kilometers, which is around 160,000 hectares, of land that was flooded. The dikes hold the water back. It allows pastoral communities to stay in their home areas. It allows women farmers to grow new crops that are water resistant, and it allows communities to live in a little bit more harmony than they would have had these communities been in conflict over natural resources. So what we've tried to do in being smarter around how we deal with the climate crisis is bringing that research from IGAD, is bringing that early warning from the African Union to understand where we can bring donor funding when it is there, when the donors do give funding, to allow it to be able to have this multiplier impact in some of these communities. This is what we're doing on the climate front. We're also trying to ensure that our work is both conflict and climate sensitive. So in places like Sudan, where you will have a rapid onset humanitarian emergency, we're looking to ensure that what we do there is not only conflict sensitive, but it looks ahead, that we're building solutions with communities that are also climate smart and that allow people to adapt to what may be unpredictable, but permanently unpredictable changes in climate. And that is the real tragedy of climate change. It's the unpredictable nature of it that leaves communities not knowing when they should plant, when they should move their animals, should they sell. As Dr. Sunday said, you have a large herd, but you don't know whether your herd will survive this current rainy season. So that's kind of what we're doing from our side as WFP, as an agency that's both humanitarian, development, and trying to dip our toe in the peace building field.
Thank you so much. Not just for reconnecting us to all of our emotions that we share with you, but telling us a bit about how you work and bringing it to the community level. And actually, I will be opening this up to everyone for questions, but as the moderator, I'm going to take my liberty of asking a couple of questions first. And picking up on your point of sort of talking about the community level, I wanted to, this is a theme that's been there over the course of the day, about how it's important to focus not just at the policy level, but also at communities. So I'm curious, and this is maybe for the colleagues from IGAD and the AU, how you see that linkage between the local and community level, and how that gets fed back up to the regional, international levels. How you see it working and how you see what you see in the challenges in terms of making it a feedback loop. I don't know who wants to go first.
Thank you, Saka. Therefore, my focus is actually to give specific examples, maybe, That's a better thing. I see it in two ways. One way is how can grassroots level information can be channeled to the mechanisms, the processes, the tools, the methodologies that are available at the African Union level. That is one aspect. And the other aspect is when the African Union implemented certain processes that are going to be implemented at a member state level, what is the role of local community actors in implementing that? Okay, therefore, with regard to this particular aspect of bottom-up approach, it is mainly data collection, and that data collection can be facilitated mainly by local actors of different nature involved in CSO structure. In some scenarios, they can be also national human rights institutes that are working on the ground, that are channeling that information up, and that information can be analyzed at the continental level together with our regional counterparts of ECOWAS, IGAD, COMESA, etc. Okay, then we can deliver certain products to our decision makers. Okay, and this actually influence certain decision-making body. Okay, for example, the AUPSC is going to look after certain issues in order to make decision, and in order to influence that decision-making process, you are going to channel this kind of low-level information. And of course, policies, decisions can be considering those issues that are coming from down. Then the other aspect is if you go, especially we are experimenting some kind of self-assessment of our own member states and building national peace infrastructures at our member state levels. These national peace infrastructures can be in the form of many things. It can be National Peace Council in Ghana, or it can be Ministry of Peace in Ethiopia, it can be the National Cohesion and Integration Commission in Kenya. Okay, but all these kind of infrastructure should be capacitated and encouraged in order to make some kind of a difference. Or in certain high-level cases, a country may self-assess itself. Okay, we have a methodology derived from the Continental Structural Conflict Prevention Framework, which is a country structural vulnerability and resilience assessment. Only 3 countries undergo that, Zambia, Cote d'Ivoire, and Ghana. And when we are doing that self-assessment, it has got a very important aspect of it, country vulnerability mitigation strategy. Because that assessment method is going to identify your resilience, wonderful, okay, how to sustain that. But at the same time also it is trying to address issues of vulnerabilities. But you don't stop there. We need to mobilize certain resources, okay, in order to mitigate those vulnerabilities. Therefore, during the mitigation level, okay, it is not as such a kind of intergovernmental organization like the AU or the REX that are going to go down there, but we need lots of local actors in order to create that energy. And most of the things that are coming, of course, through this kind of assessment